Hello everyone, welcome to the second of Huawei HCIP Open Euler certification course. In this section, we will continue to learn the Open Euler cluster architecture. And HA proxy is a powerful and highly optimized load balancer. This second describes the load balancing function and scheduling algorithm of HA proxy. And then we will also learn how to configure and implement them.
This section describes a load balancer, HA proxy. HA proxy is another widely used load balancer. One of the basic functions of HA proxy, like Nginx, supports Layer 4 and Layer 7 load balancing. Here, we will learn only the configuration related to Layer 7. Compared with Nginx, HA proxy has its own unique features. First, HA proxy has better performance based on the event-driven link processing mode and single-process processing mode. In addition, HA proxy supports ACL and graphical monitoring functions. The HA proxy supports at least 10 scheduling algorithms to meet the requirements of various scenarios. First, let's see the common algorithms supported by HA proxy. We can see some common algorithms such as RR, source, and least connection. We can also see some new algorithms such as URI, which performs hash calculation based on the URI requested by a user. Then, the corresponding request is forwarded to a specified server, which is similar to the generic hash algorithm in Nginx. Another new algorithm is HDR, which performs hash calculation on the specified information in the HTTP header request and forwards the information to the corresponding backend server based on the weight. If the specified value is invalid, the default round-robin algorithm is used for scheduling and forwarding. The last new algorithm is first. It forwards and schedules requests from top to bottom according to the server list in the configuration file. All requests are forwarded to the first server when the number of connections to the first server reaches the upper limit. Subsequent requests are forwarded to subsequent servers. The HA proxy scheduling algorithm supports static adjustment and dynamic adjustment. Static adjustment indicates that the weight adjustment takes effect only after the HA proxy is restarted. Dynamic adjustment indicates that the weight adjustment takes effect without restarting the HA proxy. All scheduling algorithms support static adjustment, and RR, least connection, and hash algorithms supports dynamic adjustment. Besides, the algorithm that supports dynamic adjustment also supports slow start. When the server is added to the cluster or weight is adjusted, HA proxy does not immediately forward the number of requests calculated based on the weight to the corresponding server. Instead, the number of requests increases gradually. For example, if a new server needs to respond to 10 requests based on the weight calculation, HA proxy does not immediately forward the 10 requests to the server. Instead, HA proxy may forward 3 requests to the server and then forward 5 requests to the server. The number of requests increases 10 finally. Hash algorithms support multiple elements, which is more powerful than other load balancer. For example, HA proxy supports hash based on client addresses, URL components, and request character elements. Because it supports multiple metrics, HA proxy can build advanced load balancing policies. The HA proxy configuration file consists of multiple parts. The first one, global parts, is used for global configuration, which is the process level configuration and is usually related to the operating system configuration. The default part is used for configuring the default configuration of the HA proxy and has a low priority. The parameter settings in the frontend, backend, or listen configuration are used. If the same parameter but different value exists in the configuration, the default configuration will be overwritten and the system uses the value in the frontend, backend, or listen configuration. Frontend is used to configure frontend servers. Its functions are similar to location and proxy paths in Nginx. As we mentioned earlier, HA proxy supports the ACL function. Related configurations are implemented in frontend. This is more powerful than location and proxy paths. Backend is used to define the backend server. Its functions is similar to upstream in Nginx. One backend can contain multiple real servers. The listen part is often used for status page monitoring and backend server check. It is a combination of frontend and backend. Next, let's quickly view the global and default configurations. Here, global is used to set global parameters, and log is global log configuration. The keyword log is used to specify the local tool, means log device in the syslog service on the local device to record logs at the info level. And then change root to change the working directory. PID file is current process ID file. And max connection is maximum number of connections. This setting is subject to the max connection setting in the front-end section or default section. And then user and group, set user and group. Daemon means runs HA proxy as a daemon process. And then mode used to set default mode. Options we have TCP layer 4, HTTP layer 7, and house returns the word OK. And then log means applies the global log configuration. Option HTTP log means enables logging of HTTP request and not logged by default. And then option don't log no means disables logging of no connections. In certain environment, an upstream load balancer or monitoring system will regularly connect to some components of its service to ensure that it is still alive. By default, event is simple support probe or scan will produce a log. If those connections pollute the logs too much, it is possible to enable auction don't log no to indicate that a connection on which no data has been transferred will not be logged, which typically corresponds to those probes If the service does not have another upstream load balancer, this option is not recommended for environments such as web applications over the Internet, while no connections could indicate malicious activities such as open port scanning for vulnerabilities. Let's move on. Option HTTP server close means close the HTTP channel after the request is complete. And option forward forward configuration means if an application on the server wants to record the IP address of the client that initiates the request, configure this option on HA proxy. HA proxy will send the client IP address to the server and address the X forwarded for field to the HTTP request. Next one, option radius path. In the case where the cookie is used, HA proxy inserts the server ID of the requested backend server into the cookie to prolong the session. Even if the backend server breaks down, the client cookies is not updated. If this option is used, the client request is forcibly directed to another backend server to ensure normal service running. Retries 3 used to specify the number for reconnection attempts to a backend server. If the number of retry exceeds this value, the backend server is marked as unavailable. And also we have a lot of timeout options. Timeout HTTP request sends HTTP request timeout interval. And timeout queue sets timeout interval of the request in the queue. Connections set connection timeout interval. Client set client timeout interval. Server set server timeout interval. HTTP keep alive sets the timeout interval for HTTP keep alive. Check set check timeout interval, and max connection set maximum number of connections each process will accept. And front-end and back-end are important configurations in HA proxy. First, define the name and listening address and port number of the front-end. For example, in this slide, main indicates the name of the front-end, and starts column 18 indicates the listening port 18 of our address on a host. And the name of the front-end is customized by the administrator. Generally, the name is related to the service, facilities, subsequent OM. The address can be wildcarded with stars, or one of the specific address can be specified. Also, we can configure an ACL in the front-end. The ACL starts with ACL to identify the configuration. Then we can customize an ACL name. For example, URL static in this slide. The operations on the request, operator, and corresponding rule are forwarded by URL static. In the front-end, the request matching ACL rules can be forwarded to the corresponding backend. For example, the slides forwarded the request matching ACL URL static to the backend named static, and the other request forward to the default backend. In this case, the default backend name is My Web Server. And then let's see HA proxy ACL definitions use a uniform format. ACL, and then ACL name, criterion, flags, operator, and value. First one, ACL name, user-defined rule name, which can contain letters, digits, and special characters. Criterion, matching criterion. HAProxy supports multiple matching criteria, including the domain name, URL, source address, and destination address. For example, matching based on the domain name. HDR something host is used to match the full domain name, and something is the matching mode, and host can be another field in the HTTP request handler, for example, user agent. More example. HDR regular host is used to match the domain name by regular expression, and HDR domain host is used to match the domain name. And then HDR length host, domain name length. HDR director, domain name directory. In addition to matching domain names, you can also use path_end to match the suffix of path in domain names. Similar to the HDR host, there are multiple matching modes. In addition, matching refers to the URL path in the request, which starts from the first slash and ends before the question mark without the host part. For example, in a complete URL, path refers to the path params part. Then there is base bag, which is used to match the prefix of base. Base indicates the connections of the first host handler and the path part of the request, which starts from the first slash and ends before the question mark. So also in this complete URL, base refers to the host, port, path, and params part. This option is useful for virtual hosts. And other matching mode includes source or source port, which matches by source IP address or source port, and also use dest or dest port, which matches by destination IP address or port. Next, let's look at flag field in the ACL. The options supported by the flag field are -I, case insensitive. -M uses a specific pattern matching method. -N forbids DNS resolution. -U forces the unique ID of an ACL, otherwise multiple ACLs with the same ID are matched. Forces end of flags. This flag is used for when a string looks like one of the flags. And then operator, specific operator. The operator supports both integer and string comparisons. First, for integer, we have EQ equal to PE greater than or equal to GT greater than LE less than or equal to LT less than. And also character string. First one, exact match. The extracted string must exactly match the pardons. And also substring match. The pardons are looked up inside the extracted string, and the URL matches if any of them is found inside. Prefix match. The pardons are compared with the beginning of the extracted string, and the ACL matches if any of them is found inside. Suffix match. The pardons are compared with the end of the extracted string, and the ACL matches if any of them is found inside. Subdirect match. The pardons are looked up anywhere inside the extracted string delimited with the slash. The ACL matches if any of them is found inside. And domain match. The pardons are looked up anywhere inside the extracted string delimited with dot. The ACL matches if any of them is found inside. And after that, final one is description of value, object type. That is the value supported by the ACL test condition. First one, Boolean, false or true. Integer or integer range. For example, 1024 to 32768 is used to match a port range. 192.168.0.1 or 192.168.0.1/24 is used to match an IP address or an IP address range. String, full name, prefix, and suffix, often domain name, path, and URL regular expression. And final one, hex block. That is the description of HA proxy ACL configuration. As we mentioned before, HA proxy supports web-based graphical management. This page is displayed here. On this page, we can view the HA proxy status and backend server status. If multiple ACL rules are required to determine the backend to which a request should be forwarded, HA proxy performs logical operations, including AND or OR. First, AND is implicit and the default operation mode. OR is represented by OR or double pipe. Negation with the exclamation mark. And rules can be coded with different parameters corresponding to different actions. For example, use backend accepts the request if the condition is met. Block blocks the request if the condition is met. HTTP request used for Layer 7 scheduling. Allow indicates that the request is accepted. Auth indicates user authentication information, and a prompt message is provided when a realm is being specified. Redirect indicates that the question is redirected. Deny indicates that the HTTP request is rejected. TCP request connection used for Layer 4 scheduling, indicating that the request is accepted or rejected if the condition is met. TCP response connection used for Layer 4 scheduling, indicating that the response package is accepted or rejected if the condition is met. Close indicates that the connection to the server is closed immediately if the condition is met. Next, let's take a brief look at an HA proxy case. The requirement is to separate access to dynamic and dynamic resources through HA proxy. Specifically, requests matching dynamic resources are forwarded to the corresponding backend through ACLs, and the rest are requests of static resources. Forwards the message to the backend that provides static resources. Since then, we have learned common load balancing cluster software, including LVS, Nginx, and HA proxy. LVS has the best performance, and Nginx HA proxy support Layer 7 load balancing. The HA proxy support ACLs. You can select the most appropriate load balancing cluster software based on your actual work situation. Next, we will demonstrate the configuration and functions of HA proxy. First, we need to log into one server. At the same time, we need to have two backend servers ready. First, let's kern whether the backend server can forward package normally. This indicates there is working properly. The second one also normal. Now let's install HA proxy. After the installation is complete, we can modify the HA proxy configuration file. The HA proxy configuration file is haproxy.cfg config file. Before configuring the HA proxy, we first switch to etc HA proxy directory and back up the configuration file to avoid the missed operations. We can use cp-r HA proxy.cfg and then the backup file name .back. And then we open and edit the configuration file. There are many configuration parameters, such as default and front-end, back-end configuration, and so on. And then we modify the backend algorithm. First, we set the backend algorithm to round robin. And then we add the IP address of the two backend servers. First one, 192.168.1.2, and then set the service port number to port 80. And at the second one, 1.3, and also port 80. After configuration is complete, we save and exit. And then we use system control restart HA proxy command to restart the service. After that, we can run the status command to check whether the service is running. And then in this case, we can run a curl command on the client to check the configuration result. And we can run the IPA to view the VIP, and then run the curl VIP to check the VIP. The access is normal, and then we entered it again. You can see that it's sent to the second server. So this is a round-robin load balancing method.
This section will describe the load balancing function, general scheduling algorithm, and configuring methods of HA proxy, and configuration and invoking of HA proxy ACL rules. Thank you for watching.